Okay, hi everyone. It is 12, a little past 12, so we're going to get started. Thank you again for joining us today. This webinar is called, or it's part of our FACE series on career readiness. You will be seeing several other topics coming in the rest of the semester, but this topic is going to be focused on critical thinking and problem solving. My name is Edwin Ragas. I'm an associate director here at the Wasserman Center for Career Development at SPS. Thank you again for joining us. So a little bit more about what FACE is. So FACE is presented by our team here at the Wasserman Center. It stands for the Faculty and Career Exchange series. So this is something that we are piloting this semester, and it's really meant to bring together the expertise of career coaches here at Wasserman with the industry experience of faculty to discuss topics impacting today's workforce. We know that career development is not something that only lives within Wasserman, right? And the great thing about being a student at SPS is you're exposed to faculty who are in the fields themselves, who are practitioners, who are seeing this work day in and day out. So we really saw an opportunity to come together to make sure that we are bringing our expertise in career development with the industry experience of faculty to come together and make sure that we are pushing out content and really positioning students for success in the workforce. So the agenda for today, we're going to go through just some background and some context as to why we're talking about critical thinking and problem solving. We're going to go into a little bit of a brief group conversation between me and our faculty guests today. And then we'll turn it over to each of them to do sort of, mini TED Talks or spotlight talks. So one will be focused on design thinking within problem solving. The session is titled In Search of the Non-Obvious. And another one is going to be tales from a faculty's experience working in brand management and how she used critical thinking in her projects. And then we'll end with Q&A. So, we will definitely save time at the end for questions, but certainly as questions come up throughout the session, as our discussion continues, feel free to type them in. We'll try to get to them when we see them and if it's an appropriate time to address the question. But no worries if we don't get to your question, because we'll make sure to get to that for a Q&A. So with that, let's get started. So why are we talking about critical thinking and problem solving? This is something that is important to employers as well as new employees. And so here at the Wasserman Center, we very much align with a professional association called NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. So each year, NACE surveys its employer members about their hiring plans and other employment-related issues in order to project the market for new graduates for the current class and to really assess a variety of conditions that may influence the market through a survey that they administer, which is the Job Outlook survey. So one of the pieces of the survey is focused on career readiness. So this here that you see on the slide, these are the 8 competencies that employers rate as being most essential in the workplace. And so as you can see, employers are saying that of the 8, critical thinking and problem solving rates as the highest at 4.66 out of a 5 scale. So again, their employers are saying that critical thinking and problem solving is the most essential competency needed. The next slide from the report that we should also be taking a look at is employers were asked to rate recent graduates on their perceived proficiency within these 8 competencies. And when employers were asked to do that, critical thinking and problem solving was sort of the third there. So again, if we jump back to the first slide, they were saying that it was most essential. But then when they were rating their recent graduates on their proficiency of critical thinking and problem solving, it's third on the list. And so if you were to put them side by side, this slide now shows the need versus proficiency on career readiness. And so really why we're talking about this is, I want to call your attention to this area that's highlighted here. The figure on the left is, let's say 100% of the employers are considering critical thinking problem solving as essential, but only saying that 56.8% of the graduates that they're seeing are really proficient in it. So this accounts for the third highest in disparity of these competencies, and that's why we're talking about critical thinking problem solving today. I mentioned earlier that there are going to be other topics that we will be covering for the rest of the semester, all related to career readiness. The other two will be focused on oral and written communications, and then professionalism and work ethic, again, because those are the three most disparate in terms of need versus proficiency. Okay, so moving on to really the meat of why we're all here is to make sure that we are hearing and leveraging the experience and expertise of our faculty. So today we have two faculty joining us from the Division of Programs and Business. We have Chet Van Wert and Jessica Goldberg. Jessica is running a little bit late, but she will be here, so no worries. Chet is an adjunct instructor in DPB, teaching within the Integrated Marketing Program. He's a senior research scholar in the Center for Sustainable Business at the NYU Stern School of Business. Jessica will be joining us in a few. She is also an adjunct instructor within the Integrated Marketing Program at DPB here at SPS. She's currently the Chief Growth Officer of a brand called Supernatural, which is a startup in the Chobani Incubator. So thank you for, Chet is sitting with me today actually in my office, and Jessica will be joining us virtually where she is at. But Chet, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
Yep. So I know I gave sort of a brief snapshot of your titles, but could you share a little bit more about just quick tidbits about your experience and how you ended up here?
Sure. So I'm a digital marketer, teaching the Integrated Marketing Program. I've been a digital marketer since 1995, so I've seen a bit of change, and I think I've sort of focused on the critical thinking challenge for many years because I spent a lot of time in two different industries that were completely disrupted by digital. The first was the music industry. I spent 14 years at a company called Columbia House in the 80s and 90s, which was, the music industry was just completely blown up by digital. And then I spent 10 years with Condé Nast Publications in the magazine publishing journalism world, which again is being blown up. So I was the digital guy in the middle of a world that's being blown up by digital. It was always obvious to me that, the people that were running these companies were really aware that digital was a threat to them, but they didn't really want to think about it. And it reminds me of a quote. If any of my students are listening, they know I love quotes, but there's a quote attributed to Mark Twain, which says that, it's not what you don't know that's going to hurt you. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
Okay.
And so critical thinking really comes down to, how can we look at things differently than most people are looking at them? And I think you have to when you're going through the kind of disruptive change that both music and journalism went through. So that's sort of my background and how I got here.
Yeah, and we're very lucky to have you here talking about this specific topic because this is something that you've navigated through sort of your different career changes, and it's great that you are in the classroom, and this is really the crux of your classes and what you teach students. So let's get started. First question is, we're talking about this topic, and there's no sort of real one standard definition of critical thinking and problem solving, right? It could be approached many different ways, but how do you define critical thinking and problem solving?
I think a key thing is to be really clear about what assumptions you're making. In other words, in any industry, in any business, in any company, there are a lot of shared assumptions. And those are your Achilles heel, right? So critical thinking is, are we questioning the assumptions that we began with, right? So when I started at Columbia House, I began in an analytical role, and that is, how executives started in that company. Everything we did was analytical. Everything we did began with, these are the assumptions that we're basing this presentation, this plan, this campaign, whatever business strategy we're talking about. It's what were the assumptions.
Okay.
And so, number one is, what are we assuming? And even if we know that it used to hold true yesterday, does it still hold true today? So assumptions is a big factor in critical thinking. Just being aware of what they are. And then number two is, what's changing in our world? We are living in a time when change is happening in practically every aspect of the world that a business lives in. The technology is changing, the business models are changing, the sharing economy, for example, subscription businesses. The culture is changing, right? I love, there's a tweet that came out 2 years ago that I keep and sometimes present in class, which I love, and it basically said this: 1998, right? Don't talk to strangers on the internet. Don't get into cars with strangers, right? Okay. 2016, literally use the internet to call strangers and get in their car. Right? Yeah. So what is changing, and when did people realize that was changing? Because change does two really important things. It undermines existing business models, like the ones I used to work for, and it creates new opportunities, such as for Uber, like I just mentioned. And how can you be aware of them as early as possible? So 10 years ago, I was at a TechCrunch meeting, and I heard the founders of Airbnb talking about it, and hadn't heard of them before. They were just starting. And I came out of there and I said, that is the stupidest idea I ever heard. What did I not get? I mean, they have more rooms available today than the entire traditional hotel industry. So it's what's changing that you need, that's going to affect you, your business, you as a professional, whatever it is that you're concerned with. So change and assumptions are the two key things that I talk about a lot.
Okay, great. And we'd also love to hear from the folks who are joining us today. The question was, how do you define critical thinking and problem solving? So let's get your thoughts. Feel free to type them in the chat box if you'd like to add to the conversation. And so, we are talking about this today because we're getting feedback from employers that, this is the most critical competency that they need to be seeing from new employees, from new graduates. But there is a disparity in the perceived level of proficiency in this competency, right? So why do you think employers are sharing feedback that employers are lacking in these skills? I mean, from your experience being an employer yourself, from being in the classroom, right, with soon-to-be graduates and alums, why do you think we're getting that feedback?
I think that students have, an incredible amount to learn and digest and to absorb in the course of being a graduate student. I have a lot of students that are focusing in analytics, and so there's knowledge to be gained, but there's also all these analytical techniques and skills to learn. There's programming skills and all these things that are like it just seems like so much that you have to absorb, that everybody's focused on, I know it, I know it, I know it. And they're not focused on, like, what do I not know, or how do I put this in perspective? How do I reframe it? It's sort of like people want to know the answer. They're trying to go into an interview and or go to a new job and say, I know that.
Yeah.
Right? I have that answer. When, they already have that answer. What they want to know is,
What don't we know,
what
right? And
don't
how
we
can you
know?
help us figure out what we
Exactly.
don't know? Yeah.
Right. They're kind of like, people are paranoid now. They know there's stuff coming around the corner that's going to hurt them, and they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And they're sort of hoping that these, millennials or Gen Z or
Mm-hmm.
whoever's coming next is going to help them understand that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of it is, you just need to absorb so much information
Mm-hmm.
to complete your classwork
Mm-hmm.
that you're not focused on learning how to question or how to reframe things and look at them differently. It's
Right.
not a skill we teach. Now, I know that the deans here are very interested in teaching those
Yeah.
things, but I don't think we do a great job of it at the moment.
Well, I think it's and there's a comment about, someone said education has not, and not just education as SPS, right? But education as a whole, it's all about teaching the answer, right? Coming up with a solution. Education is not caught up with the current worldly trend in class. We're constantly learning what has been done, um, instead of learning what can be discovered. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's true again, not just at SPS, but for everyone. And you brought up the example of being in an interview and really wanting to highlight to an employer what you know as a candidate, right? Because knowledge is power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's we tend not to, as a society, focus on things we don't know, because we are sort of told,
It's kind of scary.
yeah, yeah,
You
and it's how do you teach what you don't know? But you'll talk a little bit more later about how to explore that and go through that process, and why that's crucial. Great. And some of the other answers that we got when we asked how people define critical thinking and problem solving was being using reasoning and different forms of logic to come to a conclusion. Okay, so maybe not the obvious way that people solve a problem, being willing to let go of ideas if needed.
So yeah, I like this comment: learning what has been done instead of learning what can be discovered.
Yeah.
Right. And there's an Albert Einstein quote I love, which is, the problem with most teaching is that they're questioning you to find out what you don't know. Right.
Mm-hmm.
What a teacher really needs to do is to question you to find out what you do know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what design thinking is about, which is why I offer that as a
Something to talk
as an
about
approach
today. Yeah.
to critical thinking.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, as you all continue to have thoughts about what we're talking about, feel free to chime in. So another question that I have for you, Chet, is, can you share a time, and maybe this will come up in what you're going to share a little bit later, but share a time when you've seen an excellent instance or moment or example of critical thinking and problem solving in action, whether it was something that was you saw in a student, or something, or even if about yourself, right? Just navigating through, like you mentioned, the different changes of music and the magazine industry. So if you were to share one example of you looking back, like that was a really good example of someone who problem solved and really thought critically.
Yeah, so there's an example that I talk about often, which is when I first went to Condé Nast. Condé Nast used to publish like 20 odd magazines, which were all the big luxury brands. And my job was to create a digital consumer marketing department. So we were to use the web to sell magazine subscriptions. And so the first thing I learned when I arrived was, we have all of these magazines have websites, but we're not going to give you very much advertising inventory on there because we're selling it. There's not enough. It's in high demand, and we're selling it for a lot of money, so you can't have it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, let's see, how am I going to sell subscriptions to these magazines then if I can't get the ad inventory? But the thing was that advertising impressions were what Condé Nast had become really good at selling for like 100 years, literally 100 years. And because when you print a magazine and send it out into the world, how many of those you printed that's the last thing you know in terms of what you did with your ad. And so that's what you got really good at selling. We sell impressions. In the digital world, that was not as relevant anymore. Mm-hmm. What was possible in digital media was interaction with a customer. engagement, real engagement with the customer. And so the problem solving that my team and I had to go through was how do we go about selling magazine subscriptions when we don't have advertising inventory? And what we did is we collaborated with the editors to create interactive programs that created a lot of consumer engagement. Um, an example of one was Self Magazine, which doesn't exist anymore, but was basically a health and wellness oriented magazine. Had a fitness program that had been running for about 10 years and came out in the spring, and it was designed to help you tone up your body for that scary moment when you're going to put on a bathing suit for the first time this year. And it came out in an issue. There it was. People would rip it out of the magazine and they'd follow along or they'd do whatever. We said, let's turn it into an interactive thing.
Okay.
So consumers can come online, they can sign up, they can enter their weight, they can talk about they can enter what they're eating, they can get exercises, they can track everything they're doing. And what we did is we created a 90-day program where consumers would come back multiple times a week, interacting with the brand, finding more content, finding more nutritional information, more workout information, more fashion information, whatever it was. They became immersed in the Self brand. So we had no ad impressions, but we had tons of engagement, and we had ultimately 500,000 people a year in the early 2000s. That was a lot. Would take part in this, and we would sell like 40 or 50,000 subscriptions, just magazine subscriptions, just from this program. And the insight was, it's not about ad impressions anymore. It's about engagement. It's about relationship. It's about interactivity. And so that change of assumption, that change of the paradigm, was we had to problem solve around an old idea that was no longer as valid as it once was.
Yeah. So again, going back to what you were saying about how do you question the assumptions, how do you change that, and how do you compare that to what's changing in the macro, right? What's changing in our world? Okay, cool. So I think Jessica has joined us. Jessica, is your audio working? If you just say hello. If not, we will help you troubleshoot. Oh, I think.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Jessica?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yeah. Thanks for joining.
Wonderful.
So we are just in the middle of a discussion about the topic. Thanks for joining us. Jessica, do you want to just give a little, we introduced you to the group just with your titles here, but do you want to sort of give a quick just snapshot summary of just your background and your experience and what brings you here today?
Sure.
So my background is in consumer packaged goods, largely in marketing. I've worked at Procter and Gamble and Pinnacle Foods and did a range in marketing and business development at those companies.
Great. Yeah. So thank you for joining us today. Again, we're talking about critical thinking, problem solving. We do have some comments and questions coming in to our chat room. Oh, okay. So I am going to mute my microphone when you're talking, Jessica. So there might be some feedback coming in. So just going on with the questions here. What are some, and this is for both of you, what are some universal strategies that one can use to develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills regardless of industry? I know that both of you are in the world of marketing, but there are some folks in the room who are not in the world of marketing, and critical thinking and problem-solving is something that they also still need to develop. So some strategies that you have to offer for them to develop that regardless of industry. Jessica, we'll start with you.
Yeah, one that I think is important is getting to know people across all functions of an organization and understanding what their role is and what's important to them. Because often if you talk to people in finance, they will look at the business very differently than someone in marketing. And if you talk to someone in operations, they'll look at the business very differently than someone in marketing. And it's
Yeah.
important to get to know all
Sorry,
of those
Jessica, to interrupt you. If you could just speak a little louder into your mic.
Sure, sure. Yes. If you're able to get to know people at all levels of the organization, you will have a more holistic view that is more like probably people at the top of the organization are looking at. So I've always found that important.
For sure.
Okay, great. And what about you, Chet? Just some strategies for you.
Coming back to the comment I made earlier that you always have to know what your assumptions are. You always have to test your assumptions. Everything you do, in my world, it's marketing, so it could be a marketing campaign, or it could be a new season or whatever it might be. I'm not sure how that would translate to other outside of marketing, but basically everything you do, if you're not testing, if you're not validating your assumptions, if you're not testing new ideas, you're missing a huge opportunity because just because the world is changing, and the way you learn about that is by testing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so testing and we will. I think we were getting some notes that we are working on Jessica's audio. So bear with us as we try to troubleshoot that, but we will keep moving. Oh, so we have a follow-up question. How do you know when it's time to test the assumptions?
Well, pretty much all the time. I had an experience back when I was with Columbia House where we essentially had an offer where we gave away CDs for free if you agreed to buy more later, right?
Mm-hmm.
CDs, videos, whatever it was. And our competitor came in and said, you can have 8 for the price of 1 and never have to buy another one, right? So we went along happily for a while saying, boy, they're going to put themselves out of business really quickly that way, aren't they, right? That was our assumption. And yet they kept turning up the volume on their advertising campaigns. And so, I came back and said, we've got to test it.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to enroll some people that way and just see how they perform. And lo and behold, it was profitable.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as profitable as ours. But we also learned some other things. So one of the things I'll come back to is when you're looking at data, it's not just about did it work or not work. It's like, what else did you learn with it?
Mm-hmm.
In that case, one of the things we learned was that there were 20% of their customers that drove their entire profitability. Everybody else was losing money. But those 20% were profitable enough to make the whole thing profitable. So we then went out and created a copycat version, which was, a flanker brand. We used it to sort of attack ourselves, but mostly to attack them. And we designed the whole thing around the 20%. We optimized it for the 20%.
Mm-hmm.
We just ignored the other 80%. So you learn that. So when is the right time to test your assumptions? It's like almost all the
time. So we've got one more question before we transition over to Chet and Jessica's respective sections. So, I mentioned that we are getting feedback from employers about not seeing this skill in new employees, right? And right now we're focused on, from the employee perspective, what can we be doing? How can we develop the skill? But there might be some folks in the room who are managers, right? Who are quote unquote employers. How can they develop this skill within their employees and team? And Jessica, I think that's your audio coming in with the sirens. If you're not talking, if you could just put it on mute.
Sure.
Just to help with the audio. But maybe let's actually have you start us off with that. What are your thoughts on how current managers can develop or encourage the skill within their employees or their team?
Yeah, I think
it's
I've been a manager and
I've been a manager and
understand what everyone's everyone's strengths and utilize different people. One thing that I've found the most important is to recognize that everyone's strengths are different, and some people may be good at analytics, some may be good at marketing, some may want to be managers themselves, and kind of finding opportunities within the organization for them is really critical. And I think understanding over time what your skill sets are individually is important as well.
Within the organization.
Okay, great. And what about you, Chet?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Sure. How can current managers develop this skill within their employees or their team?
Well, I think you have to encourage people to...
Sorry, Jessica, just your audio on mute.
Encourage disagreement. Encourage people to pursue lots of different things. You want to create... you want to give your employees the ability to learn how to think differently and look differently at the world by a lot of different things. Just do something different, and encourage it. Send them to a different conference. Suggest that they read a different publication, different blog. Try to broaden people out, because the more they're exposed to, that's what Steve Jobs always said. It's like, because the only problem with Bill Gates was he never went to an ashram, and he never dropped acid, and he never, learned calligraphy, and all of those things were very important to Jobs, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So great feedback for those of you in the room who are employers, to be thinking about how to have your employees flex, their muscles in this skill. So we do see some other questions coming in. We will get to those at the end. But right now I do want to transition over to Chet and Jessica for them to talk about their sort of specific thoughts on this topic. I'm aware that there's some echo coming in when Jessica speaks, so hopefully when it's her turn to speak, that we'll have that all sorted out. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Chet to take us through his piece.
Thank you. So I mentioned before that I had come through several different jobs where my role was to launch new businesses. Mostly within a corporate environment, although lately more in the startup world, but mostly launching new businesses in a corporate environment. And so I came across the field of design thinking, and that's where I came in with a lot of the ideas that I'm going to present here. I call it In Search of the Non-Obvious for a really crucial reason, and that is because things that are obvious are already in the market, right? They're already being acted on. Everybody's aware of them. Everybody believes in them, and there's no new information there. So you're looking for things that are not obvious. Nadia had a question here, which is, when you see a trend, how do you realize that it is a trend in fact and not an outlier? That's really hard, Nadia. I don't know the answer. If I did, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. All trends start as outliers, and you want to see them when they're outliers. You want to notice them first. So there's this quote I love here, which is, "The future's already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." So this guy, William Gibson, wrote the book that the Matrix movie was based on.
Cool.
But and it's true. What this curve represents is, this is the classic product adoption curve for a new product, right? So you have the early innovators who wait online all night to get the first iPhone, and then you have, this is how the adoption of a new product goes, but it's also how awareness of new ideas goes. And at the point where everybody gets it and everybody sees it and it's obvious, it's too late to take action. So sorry, Nadia, you've got to get it early on when only the innovators see it, and track it and test it. One of the important skills in design thinking is just the idea of doing experiments, of testing things, of doing prototypes, of asking your customers, or talking to your customers. So looking for those things that are happening in the real world, but are not widespread yet, and thinking about how they might affect you.
Okay.
So reframing, critical thinking is really about reframing problems. If you reframe them, new solutions become obvious. It's all about asking the right questions. And this is from a recent, or the current issue of Wired. It's a story about Elon Musk and how he went absolutely insane last year. But here's a quote from an executive that worked for him that says, "He's the smartest person I've ever met. I can't tell you how many times he asked a question that made us realize we were looking at the problem completely wrong." So that skill, that ability to ask questions that help people look at a problem differently is crucial. And it's one of the things that we do learn in design thinking.
Okay.
So this is a framework, so then you go, oh, we're talking about all these lovely ideas. How do I actually do it, chat, right? And so this is how I teach it. Okay. So there's a book called The Innovator's DNA. It's written by the guys that originally wrote about disruptive innovation, particularly this guy, Clayton Christensen. And then they did a book which said, we've studied a bunch of disruptive innovators, the people that started PayPal and eBay and all of these companies. We've studied them and we've figured out what they do that's different from everybody else. And it's these behavioral skills that are highlighted here in the middle, which is questioning, observing, networking, and experimenting. And then there's this fifth skill, which is associational thinking, which basically says questioning, observing, networking, experimenting give you lots of inputs. And then how do you process those to generate an innovative business idea? So this is how I teach my students. And the first skill being, I don't even know how to use this thing. Edwin, okay. So the first thing being to say, innovation, creativity is a learnable skill. This is a study that they referred to where there are actually many studies that have been done of identical twins, where one twin is perceived to be a very creative person and one isn't. And they said basically, unlike IQ, which is 80% genetic, and there's not that much you can do afterwards, they say with creativity, it's only about a third genetic, and you can learn to be innovative. This is the world we live in of exponential change. We think about change. The thing that constantly surprises people is that things take off and develop faster than they expect. We typically expect change to happen on this blue linear line, just sort of steady change. Whereas really what happens is lots and lots of things pile on and change accelerates. And that's really important if you're talking about what are the changes that are undermining old businesses and creating opportunities for new businesses.
So just before we move forward, is this disruption area, that is the sweet spot that people should be thinking about? Those are where the questions lie. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And the problem with established businesses is that they may know that something like the internet is coming along and that people are using the internet instead of magazines, right? Mm-hmm. But they think they've got a lot of time to deal with it. And then what happens is it takes off exponentially. Mm-hmm. And so that complacency kills them. Yeah.
I think this relates to, just tying this back to career development and one's job search. When you do, if you're looking for a role in a specific market, really understanding, the linear and the exponential and where that sort of state of disruption lies, because that's where the opportunities might be uncovered for you, and that might be sort of the area that you want to explore more.
We talked earlier about why employers might perceive that their employees don't have these critical skills, and I said because there's so much that you have to learn to get through graduate school. You have to absorb so much that you're focused on learning all the answers. Mm-hmm. The problem with an answer is it's the shelf life of an answer is getting shorter and shorter. The minute you've got that answer,
It's already changed.
it's yes.
Yeah.
What's really valuable and what gets more valuable over time is the ability to ask the right questions. So, okay, Chet, how do you ask the right questions? So there are a couple of, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about this. Peter Drucker, master of management theory, had this to say, which is the most serious mistakes are not giving the wrong answer. It's starting with the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to like that quote about Elon Musk. But one way to ask the right questions or to learn how to ask the right questions is to dig through the at least five layers of why, right? Just keep asking why. So in this example, oh, we have a defective product. Why was that? Oh, well, the worker made a mistake. Okay, but why? Oh, because they weren't trained. Okay, but why? Because the training program is underfunded. Okay, but why? Because the budget priorities were different and we took the money and did something else with it. Well, why did the company do that? So sort of digging down through the different layers of why is very important in a complex situation to understand the whole context of a problem. So five whys is one approach you can take. Another approach is this three-step process, which is why, what if, and how. So why says step back, notice what others are missing, challenge assumptions, all these things I've said already. Number two is the interesting part. What if, right? Magical scenarios. So 20 years ago, a magical scenario would have been, I want a radio station that plays exactly what I want to hear, but songs that I haven't heard yet. It knows what I like. That would have been magical 20 years ago. Now it's normal, right? So the question is, if you had asked that question 20 years ago, what you would do is say, well, what do I have to do to make that happen? Another interesting way is to do these challenge scenarios and say, well, what would J.K. Rowling do? What would Elon Musk do? What would Oprah do? What would anybody do? So if you think what would different people do, it gives you another frame to look at the problem. And then how? It's like I said just before, if you take any problem that looks huge, that looks complicated, and you don't know where to start, if you just break it down into pieces, use questioning to break it down and figure out what the pieces are. And then you can digest those one at a time. And then okay, so that's really questioning. There are a number of approaches, and if you look at the footnotes of all these slides, there are books that you can read. A More Beautiful Question is a huge book. We need to move on. So observing is the next one. How do you notice those things, right? And Nadia says, like, how do I know if it's a real thing or something that's going to go away? But you can train yourself to become a better noticer. I ask all my students to do what's called a surprise journal, which is every single day, write down one thing that you noticed that day, which was surprising or unexpected. Going back to Peter Drucker again, he wrote a whole article called The Discipline of Innovation, which basically said, when things don't turn out the way you expect, your natural tendency is to like ignore it. Mm-hmm. That's not the right thing to do. Why are they not coming out the way you expect? So if you keep a journal as a discipline every single day, what will happen is you become a better noticer. Somebody did this with questions and was told by their boss they'd become like the smartest person in the company. And I will say this to my students. When you're invited to a meeting, when you're invited to an interview, knowing the answer isn't necessarily this. You can look like the smartest person in the room if you just have the best question. The best questions are probably worth more than the answers.
Yeah. Before we move forward, I think I want to jump in here too about something that we see from my world of career development is students, when they're on a job search, they're very focused on looking, right? So what do I want? Where should I go? What kind of company do I need to, go for? And the question we find that they don't ask themselves is, who's looking for me? Right? So working backwards. And we find that when they approach it that way, they're able really to connect who they are with what the market is looking for. So working backwards. And I think that ties in with being a better noticer. And this piece on networking for discovery.
Networking. This is hugely important. You have to network. You must do it not because you want to get things from people, and that's what's listed on the right-hand column of delivery driven, but this focus on the left column, which is discovery driven networking. Talk to people who are not like you, people with different backgrounds, people in the arts, people in different industries, people of different ages. Learn new things, test ideas with different people. Ask people, why do you think this is happening? Why are people sleeping on other people's couches? You know, I mean,
and now they're making so much money from it. Right?
And just my last slide is copy this slide. I've given you the URL. Make a plan. Make your own networking plan and put different people in each of these buckets, or different activities, or different sources of information, and use networking as your growth plan, personal growth plan.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that, Chet. So we are now going to move to Jessica. I think we've solved the audio issue, and so when Jessica is on, I'm going to mute my mic. But Jessica, just make sure that you are speaking very loudly into the mic for your portion, okay?
Sure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things I've learned in brand management, and how in brand management I've had to tie everything together holistically. So when I worked at Procter & Gamble, I was the brand manager of a sub-brand
Yeah.
called Bounty Basic Paper Towels. It was a mid-tier paper towel, which meant it's less expensive. So people who want to pay a little less for something would buy that one. And when we were designing it, there were a lot of critical thinking went into how we designed it. We had to think about the price point. We had to think about the name. We had to think about the packaging. We had to think about the communication strategy. And all of it, we had to think about a range of things. In the name specifically, we ended up calling it Bounty Basic. We were thinking about how much do we want to lean on the brand Bounty that people know about versus a new name, and we decided let's use what people know, but also use Basic to communicate that it's something very different. When we were looking at the price point, ultimately we ended up deciding on something was less than Bounty, but more than other mid-tier paper towels, and that was an important component of it. And then when we were trying to communicate it in TV commercials, we had to think about what would make it different than Bounty. And Bounty paper towels, you may have seen a lot of commercials where things are very absorbent. We wanted to show that it was still very good, but we decided not to lean on absorbency, so that we were showing something different and unique. So we decided to focus on strength, and in the commercials had a lot of shots of cleaning up very hard messes off of counters rather than absorbing liquids. So it was all various components: the pricing, the communication, the product itself, packaging, pricing. Critical thinking was required across to bring it all together.
Yeah, sorry, Jessica, we're gonna pause you there for a second,
Sure.
okay?
Sure.
Is if Jessica, can you talk, and if the folks in the room can just say if you can hear her. Jessica, just keep talking, sorry.
Yes.
Just a little bit more to add, and we'll see if the audio is working now.
Sure. Are you able to hear me?
All right, if the folks in the room, if you could just say can you hear her better, or okay.
Okay, so I guess leave it unmuted.
Okay, we're gonna keep going. We are going to make sure that we recap Jessica's answers for those of you who weren't able to hear.
So if you put in your
And also, if you put in your net ID into the chat box, we'll make sure that we get you a copy of the slides and the recording. But we'll work with Jessica offline to make sure that her answers are captured, and we can share that with you all as well. Okay. So we are going to now turn it over to just an open Q&A. We have some questions that came in, but if folks have some questions that they want Jessica and Chet to answer, feel free to type them in right now. I'm just going to scroll back up to the top, okay? Okay, so let's see what questions we have here. How do you know when it's time to test the assumptions? We already got that. In a short interview, how do you show your problem-solving skills?
You want me to go?
Yeah, Chet, maybe you can go.
I think one of the there are two ways to do it. One is you ask good questions.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be knowledgeable about who you're talking to and what their business is and what's happening to them. And if you ask good questions about that, it shows that you are, you're interested in the big picture. So the other one is, I think, just talking about your own experience. I believe that being involved in a project, whether it's an internship, a project in school, or a project at work, something that has a team working on a problem from beginning, middle, and end, is incredibly important. It differentiates you from everybody else. It's not like, oh, I'm the guy who knows how to do search marketing. It's, oh, we had a small team, we got together, we had this problem. We came up with a solution, we implemented it. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a great story.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a project like that, be good at telling that story. If you don't, get one.
Mm-hmm. Something that we use is called the STAR method. So it's an acronym that stands for situation, task, action, and result. And that's a really great way for those of you who are, have that similar question of how do I communicate in an interview my problem-solving skills? Like Chet said, find your example and make a STAR statement about it. So again, focusing on situation, the task, the action, and then the result. Okay, so we do have time for questions. Jessica, do you want to take a stab at that answer or have anything else to add on? Again, in an interview setting, if it's a short time, how do you convey your problem-solving experience?
Yeah,
And again, just speak loudly into the mic.
Sure. I think actually the questions that you ask say a lot about your problem solving and your critical thinking and can tell the interviewer a lot.
Okay, yeah, for sure. And to follow up on the question about problem solving in interviews, would interviews value those stories if they aren't of the field of interest? For example, I work in theater, which is basically entirely problem solving, but I'm concerned that employers wouldn't be interested in examples from that experience. So the question here is pulling examples that aren't necessarily of the world that you're trying to get a job in. Chet, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you certainly might have to explain to somebody how theater problem solving is like other problem solving. Just be prepared to do that. You can do that in a couple of sentences. I think being fast on your feet is incredibly valuable, and doing improv, for example, like stand-up improv, is a great way to develop your critical thinking skills, or your creative thinking skills at least. And that, a lot of management trainings these days use improv.
Yeah. I've heard that's really good for salary negotiation tactics too.
I bet.
Yeah. We do have another question coming up, so let's.
Yeah, and
oh yeah, go ahead.
Another thing, as an interviewer, I always look at transferable skills. So I'm always looking at, you know, if someone was in another field, what did they do in that field that
as an
relate to this? And I think
relate to this.
that's
And I
more
think
that's the
that's
most
more
important thing. So
that's
I
the
think
most important
absolutely
thing. So I
leverage your
think
experience.
absolutely leverage your experience.
Right, really highlight how it transfers over regardless of industry.
Yeah, you know, my wife was in theater undergraduate and ended up in a sales role with a technology company. You know, and you know, it was like one of those. She had one of those experiences where the slides failed or the connection failed or whatever, and she's like, well, imagine if you will that you're looking at a screen and here's what's going to happen. You know, it's like being able to think quickly on your feet and tell a good story is incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to what both Jessica and Chet were saying earlier is, the answers aren't always so obvious. So it may not be so obvious for the interviewer how experience in theater production or theater, might help in that current role. But, you as the person being interviewed may have to connect those dots for the employer because they're not necessarily seeing it so obviously. So
I think the other thing is not just connecting the dots, but making sure that that person is paying attention to you. We've all had interviews where we didn't really feel like we had that person's whole attention. Say something at the beginning that makes them think, oh, this person might be interesting. Maybe I really should pay attention.
Yeah. So what's an example of that? Like, is it something that is that needs to relate to the job description, or tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts are on that.
Could be, oh, your new campaign, new product,
Okay.
Your competitor's product, I really liked it,
Uh-huh.
For these reasons, or I didn't understand this other thing about your campaign or your product or your whatever it is you're offering.
Yeah. Something to sort of disrupt, I guess, the flow in a good way.
Yeah, something that's making a connection with that person.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. So we do want to be mindful of time. We apologize for the audio issues, but what we will be doing is we will make sure that folks get a recording of this presentation along with the slides, and we're going to go back and see if we can transcribe Jessica's responses and make sure that we send those to you as well, because she is a great faculty member with great expertise and had great experiences to share about her experience with Bounty relative to critical thinking and brand management. So I'd like to thank everyone who has joined today. You will be seeing a link to a survey in the chat box. So if you could fill that out, that would be great. Again, we want to let you know that this is the first time that we are doing this webinar series called FACE, which again is a faculty and career exchange. So this was the first of a series, critical thinking and problem solving, and we have two other topics coming up in March and April. And that's oral and written communications on March 28th, and then professionalism and work ethic on April 17th. So thank you again for joining us. Please make sure to type in your net ID in the chat box if you haven't yet, so we can be sure to send you all of the materials from today. And please go ahead and enter some feedback into the link that was included in the chat box, and that's the webinar survey. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. Chet, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.